Sometimes, when you reach the end of your life, the memories that stay are not the ones you expected, not the parties, not the neighbors, not even the birthdays. What stays are the moments when you chose between yourself and someone you loved more than anything. Hello, my dear ones. Today I want to share with you a story that still hurts to tell. It is not a happy story, but it is a real one. If you are watching this, I ask you kindly, subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine, but most importantly, write in the comments where you are watching from. It means so much to me to know where these words travel and who they touch. Now, imagine this. You give up the dream that made your heart beat, the only thing that ever gave you a sense of purpose. You give it up willingly, out of love, out of sacrifice. And decades later, the very person you gave it all up for looks you in the eyes and says, "You are nothing but a burden." This is my story, and I beg you, stay until the very end, because only then will you understand the true weight of those words. I was a young girl once, though now my body bends and my hands shake. I wasn't born into wealth. My father worked in a factory, my mother cleaned houses. We were poor, yes, but our little home was full of music. My grandmother had a piano, old and scratched, and when I was 7, she sat me down and placed my fingers on the ivory keys. Something happened inside me that day. A spark. It felt like the world finally spoke my language. From then on, I lived for music. I practiced on that broken piano until my fingers bled. My parents didn't always understand. It wasn't practical, they said, but they saw the fire in me. When I turned 16, I was offered something unimaginable, a scholarship to study at a conservatory in the capital, a chance to live my dream, to play on real stages, to let the world hear me. I still remember the day the letter came. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting elegant. My hands trembled as I tore it open. "We are pleased to inform you." I screamed so loud the neighbors must have thought we won the lottery. In a way, I thought I had. But life, as I learned, doesn't care much about letters or dreams. Because 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. It was a boy I loved. At least I thought it was love back then. His smile was warm, his promises sweet. We were young, reckless, full of illusions. The moment I told him, his face changed. He mumbled about not being ready, about needing time, about maybe finding work in another city. Within a week, he was gone. I never saw him again. My parents were devastated, not just because of the shame in those days, but because they knew what it meant for me. My mother cried into her apron, whispering, "What about your music? What about the scholarship?" I was only 17, and I had to choose. The world was asking me, your dream or your child. I chose my child. I told the conservatory I could not come. I folded the letter, the acceptance that had once made me feel like I could touch the stars, and I tucked it into a shoebox under my bed. I thought I would look at it one day and smile, proud of my choice. I didn't know then that I would one day look at it and weep. The months of pregnancy were not easy. I was sick, weak, and scared. But every time I placed my hand on my belly, I whispered, "You are worth it. You will always be worth it." That belief carried me when nothing else did. When my daughter was born, I held her tiny body against my chest, and for a moment it felt like the world stood still. She was beautiful, fragile, perfect, and I swore then and there that I would give her the life I never had. But promises cost more than words. I worked wherever I could, laundries, kitchens, sewing rooms. My hands aged before my face did. My body grew tired while my heart stayed determined. I gave her everything. Every coin I earned went to clothes, to books, to school supplies. I told myself my dream had simply changed. My daughter would become the future I had sacrificed. At first, it felt enough. Watching her smile, hearing her laugh, it was like hearing music again. But as the years passed, I began to see a distance in her eyes, a sharpness in her words. She wanted more. She wanted to climb higher, to escape the poverty I had dragged us through. I supported her, but sometimes, when she looked at me, I could see it, the shame. And that was the beginning of a wound I still carry. I used to tell myself that dreams could wait, that maybe one day I would return to music. But dreams do not wait. They wither when you lock them away. What grew instead was duty. I was only a teenager, but with a baby in my arms, childhood ended overnight. I still remember rocking her in that old wooden chair, humming pieces of Chopin I had memorized, pretending that the creaks of the chair were applause. She would sleep in my arms, her breath warm against my chest, and I would whisper, "One day, you'll understand why I gave it all up." But babies don't ask for dreams. They ask for food, clothes, warmth, and those things cost money. So I worked. My first job was in a laundry. Steam burned my skin, chemicals stung my throat, and at night my hands smelled of bleach no matter how much I scrubbed them. I would leave before sunrise, return after dark, and still, the money barely stretched far enough. When she grew older, I cleaned offices. At night, when the glass towers were empty, I pushed my mop across endless floors, my back aching, my fingers raw. I remember standing in front of those grand pianos in lobbies, untouched, silent, shining in the dim light. I would brush the keys with my fingertips, so lightly the sound barely formed. For a second, I felt alive again. But then the supervisor would appear, frowning, and I'd go back to scrubbing. Every sacrifice had a reason. When she needed books, I worked overtime. When her shoes wore out, I skipped meals to save money. My neighbors sometimes said, "You look tired, you look older than your years." But I didn't care. I wasn't living for myself anymore. I told myself my daughter would see it, that she would know, that when she grew up she would look at me and understand the price I had paid. But children don't see sacrifice. They only see what others have that they don't. When she was 10, she asked me why I never dressed nicely like the other mothers, why I always wore second-hand coats, why I never put on lipstick. I smiled and told her, "Because I want you to have everything, my darling." She didn't smile back. She rolled her eyes. It was the first time I felt it, the distance. Still, I believed love would cover it. I told myself, she's young, she doesn't understand yet. And I kept working, harder and harder, until my bones ached. There were nights I would collapse on the floor, my body shaking from exhaustion. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my life might have been if I had boarded that train to the capital. I imagined the conservatory, the concerts, the applause. Then I would hear my daughter's laugh from the other room, and I would tell myself, this is better, this is worth it. But the truth was, sometimes, in the silence of the night, I wasn't sure if I believed myself anymore. The years blurred into one another. Work, home, sleep, if you can call it sleep, when your bones ache so much they keep you awake. I felt my body breaking long before I was old, my back bent from lifting, my lungs rattled from dust and smoke, my hands grew stiff and twisted. Still, I told myself, keep going, just keep going. She needs you. When my daughter was in middle school, she was already excelling. She was bright, clever, ambitious. Teachers praised her, neighbors admired her. And every time someone said, she has such a future ahead of her, I felt proud enough to ignore the pain in my chest. But the cost was high. I remember one winter in particular. My body had given up on warmth. My joints were swollen, my fingers cracked and bleeding from scrubbing. I coughed blood into rags and hid them under the bed so she wouldn't see. But she needed new winter boots, and so I worked. I worked until I collapsed on the kitchen floor one evening. My vision went black for a moment, and when it returned, I saw her standing in the doorway. She looked so frightened, so small. She ran to me, crying, "Mama, please don't die." I held her and whispered, "I won't. I promise I won't." And I meant it. I refused to let my body fail while she still needed me. But something happened in those years. She began to see the difference between us and the other families. Her classmates had parents who drove cars, who wore fine clothes, who took vacations. I gave her food, shelter, books, but she wanted more. At first, it was small things. A sigh when I gave her homemade lunches instead of store-bought snacks. A grimace when I patched her dresses instead of buying new ones. And later, it became sharper. "Why can't you be like the other mothers?" Those words cut deeper than any knife. But still, I endured. Because I loved her. And I want to pause here, my dear ones, and ask you something. Tell me in the comments, would you give up your dream for your child? Would you trade the life you once imagined for their chance at something better? I read your words, every single one of them, and they mean more than you know. Because when I hear your answers, I feel less alone. Back then, I told myself love was enough. That one day she would understand. That one day she would look at me and say, "Thank you, Mama. Thank you for everything." But life rarely gives us the endings we hope for. Teenage years have a way of changing everything. The sweet child who once clung to my skirts became sharper, colder, more distant. She was growing into her own person, and I knew that was natural. But what I didn't expect was the wall she began to build between us. By then, she had friends from wealthier families, girls with manicured nails, boys with expensive shoes. I would watch her glance at them with envy, and then glance back at me with something else, something that felt like shame. One evening, she came home late from a school event. I had stayed up, waiting by the window with a lamp lit. When she walked in, I asked gently, "How was it, darling?" She shrugged, dropped her bag on the floor and muttered, "Fine." But then she looked at me, at my worn sweater, my tired face, my hands red and raw from cleaning, and she said words I will never forget. "Why can't you just look normal?" Everyone's mother looks nice. You embarrass me." It was like a knife twisting in my chest. I tried to smile, to hide the tears. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'll try harder." But how could I try harder? I was already giving her everything. From then on, she pulled further away. She didn't want me at school events. She didn't want me meeting her friends. She begged me not to come near the campus when she was with them. Still, I kept working. Still, I told myself, it's just a phase. She will understand one day. But then, one night when she was 16, I overheard her speaking on the phone to a friend. Her voice was sharp, almost angry. She said, "I can't do anything in this house. My mum is always there, always watching, always hovering. She doesn't get it. She doesn't realize she's just in the way." I froze in the hallway. The words echoed through me like thunder. In the way. That was the first time my daughter called me a burden, though she didn't know I was listening. And that, my dear ones, was only the beginning.